social channels, we will be using the hashtag Atlanta Ad Club. So thank you all again for joining us. And with all that being said, I will turn it over to Melanie Brown, who is our Diversity and Inclusion Chair, to introduce tonight's event.
Good evening. My name is Melanie Brown, and I serve as Diversity and Inclusion Chair for the Atlanta Ad Club. This has been a difficult time for our city and nation, especially for the Black community. Many are hurt, frustrated, and angry because of the unjust deaths of Black men and women. The year 2020 has felt relentless with two pandemics gripping our country. The first, COVID-19, responsible for close to 200,000 US deaths and the loss of millions of jobs. The coronavirus pandemic is hitting Black and Brown Americans especially hard on all fronts. The second, systemic racism, has been present for centuries since the very founding of our country and has been forced to the front of our collective consciousness once again. The Atlanta Ad Club is committed to connecting, supporting, and building our community. This requires that we listen and act. We will continue to develop programming that is inclusive, tackles difficult conversations, and leaves attendees with actionable items to help build a better society. Recent events have also started conversations centered around workplace culture, the work, cultivating talent, diversity, and inclusion. All of this has prompted the need for today's discussion. Now, I'm thrilled to welcome our moderator. Geraldine White is the head of diversity and inclusion for Publicis Sapient North America as part of a global D&I team and serves as a lead on the Publicis Group Talent Engagement and Inclusion Council. In these roles, she is responsible for developing and driving the diversity and inclusion strategy for Publicis Sapient globally and contributing to Publicis Group US D&I strategies, touching over 30,000 employees. Let's welcome her.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Melanie. I'm excited to join you and excited to have each of you join us in this conversation this evening with the dynamic panelists that we have to touch on such an important subject. We invite you to join into this conversation. You feel free to ask questions within the Q&A chat, and we will certainly get to them towards the latter part of the conversation. First, I'd like to move forward with introducing our panelists that we are excited and really wanting to bring to you this overall conversation. Our first panelist is Paul Choi. Paul is Chief Product Officer, Goods and Services. Paul joined Goods and Services, Inc. in 2019, moving from the brand to the agency side. He brings brand, design, product, and retail leadership experience from his work with Ralph Lauren, Levi, Filson, The Gap, and Orbis. Through his passion for product, Paul builds and delivers product visions and strategies for innovation, evolution, and growth of consumer brands. Our next panelist is Solange Claudio. She is President and Chief Client Officer at Moxie MRY. Solange's visionary approach to business and leadership have earned her recognition inside and outside the marketing arena. She possesses a diverse background with more than 20 years of experience, ranging from online media and CRM to social, mobile, and technology solutions. As President Chief Client Officer for Marketing and Creative Services Agencies, Moxie and MRY, Solange helps deliver best-in-class advertising and marketing initiatives that drive business results for clients. Our next panelist is Jelanii Reed, VP Client Leadership at You Are Here. Jelanii is an experienced brand leader and marketing executive with nearly 15 years experience in sports, entertainment, and multicultural marketing. At You Are Here, she oversees the Aflac, Aaron's, and Synovus accounts. Her keen awareness and insights into important cultural segments have elevated clients, marketing strategies, and driven them to impact consumers through branded experiences. We also have Pavani Yalla. She's creative director at Second Story. Pavani is experienced design director for Second Story, which is a design studio specialized in creating immersive interactive experiences within physical environments. In addition to leading award-winning products for some of the world's biggest brands and leading cultural institutions, Pavani enjoys creating new tools and methods for emerging field of UX for physical environments. Thank you and welcome to each of our panelists. So I'd like to start with our first question. And before that, I'd like to say, as Marini mentioned, as we continue to manage through inclusion and crisis, throughout COVID, we have seen many elements of disturbing behavior, many around discrimination, including anti-Asian sentiment and xenophobia. As we move forward through COVID, we also saw, obviously, this disturbing uprisings and shootings of unarmed Black men and women. I'd like for each of you to describe the impact that these recent uprisings have had on your organizations, internal or external. Solange, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, yes. It's been so difficult because it's almost like a calamity of things that are impacting our communities at once. And each one builds upon the other. And there's a lot of factors in that and what that may mean for how much pressure some of our community of color, our Black and Brown community of color in particular, and how they're facing some of these challenges and how they're compounding for them. One of the things that has been very difficult for our people in our agency is that a lot of our folks are still cutting across multiple socioeconomic groups and backgrounds that then compromise their ability to actually get through this pandemic in a holistic way because of the extra or incremental support that they provide for their families across the board. I can only use myself as an example, and so I'll start with me. I have a lot of family members who are frontline or essential workers. I have a sister-in-law who's a nurse. I have a mother-in-law who's a postal service person. I have a brother-in-law who's a cop. And so we have a lot of frontline family members, and because we have very extensive families and they're the complicated social relationships, right? Our multiple generation living with each other is a very common thing. Multiple generations or skip generations trying to take care of each other is a very common thing. Financial support that, for example, I provide for extended family when things get rough. And then the healthcare becomes compromised even more so because we have a lot of comorbidities and a lot of pre-existing conditions that are making us more susceptible. You put those two things together and our Black and Brown employees and other communities of color are really feeling the strain of this across every factor of life that you can imagine. And so I think it's been a really, really tough time. And I don't know if folks really understand that while certainly COVID is impacting everyone, and while certainly social injustice is impacting certain groups, when you start to compound that and add in the inadequacies of our healthcare system in this country, the inadequacies of our educational system in this country, and then frankly, the inadequacies of some sort of safety net for parents who now have to navigate figuring out how to handle children in the midst of all of this, there are some folks who are really struggling in our communities. And I'm finding it very difficult to, number one, figure out how to provide a support system for something that really should be larger than just our agency trying to provide. These are societal support systems that should be in place. And two, trying to really give everyone as much grace and just space to be able to navigate this.
Thank you for that, Solange. There are absolutely so many layers to this, and I think many of the things that you mentioned, up to and including the nuances of now having to manage through full-time working stay-at-home parents, right? Especially as we start to go back to school. And the fact that we are talking about the organizational context of it, I think is important as well, because with the societal implications, we're managing what is within our locus of control within organizations, right? I definitely want to open the question up to other panelists as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say that this has really been a really critical time for all of us. I think for those of us in the advertising field, which we are, it really has called us to the carpet, right? It really forces us to have these difficult conversations. Normally these conversations are had amongst Black employees or Asian employees, right? But right now there are no distractions. There's nothing to prevent you now from having this uncomfortable conversation within the walls of our organizations. And it's critical, right? Because we're storytellers. How can we tell stories about people that we're serving if we can't tell their story about ourselves? So I think it's forced us to really take a step back and unpeel these layers of whether it's racism, microaggression, unconscious bias, right? It's the onion, and you keep peeling back this layer and you uncover so many things that we need to address that are affecting Black people, brown people, Asians, LGBTQIA. Like, it keeps unfolding, right? So I think it's causing us to have these critical conversations that are important, that are going to move us forward. And I think in our organization, we've done a great job to have those hard conversations, but they're beneficial and necessary to move us forward as a collective culture that can, we're here to do, right? Move the culture forward, make sure that we're finding ways to unite us, not divide us, right? So this is a critical time where we can really step up and take a stance and truly tell a story that Americans really need to hear.
Agreed. With all the weight and the trauma, it's the first time that we haven't had sort of this overarching echo chamber of only Black and brown voices having these conversations with a greater awareness in the world. It's a great point.
The only thing I'll add to what Solange and Jelanii already said was that I'm also seeing, because of a result of that, people checking in on each other and kind of making an effort to check in on people's personal lives and be there for each other in a way that maybe we weren't all doing as much before, because we're not bumping into each other in the office, right? So we're having to intentionally make that a part of our practice, at least as leadership. And so I am seeing a change in behavior that is proactive because of that.
Yes, I think it's ironic, actually, that the COVID pandemic has caused us to be out of the office, but it's forced us to be closer together. So we have to communicate better, because our only form of communication are through Zooms like this, or through the phone or email. And so I think it forces us to be more communicative, more open, and listen better. I think that's one of the big deals that personally I've taken on, is try to listen more.
Thank you. Jelanii and Solange, I would like for you to share, if you can, how have you encouraged some of these healthy and productive conversations about what's happening within your organization, with your clients internally, or both? And what are some of the things your companies may have done specifically?
I'll start. Okay, so again, I work for You Are Here. We're all about creating and really connecting the human experience. So what we've done, and really, although I'm standing kind of in front of you on this Zoom, I really am just a representation of all the great employees that work at our company, specifically the people of color who really kind of came together and created, we didn't ask for permission. We decided to take the step forward and put together a plan that we presented to our leadership that really, again, address all the issues that come around diversity and inclusion, right? So we all sat around a table, talked about retention, talked about hiring, talked about equity, pay, promotions, internships, right? Going out in the community, you name it, we brought it to the table, and our leadership was receptive of that. So what they've done is really put together a town hall that we're going to be having shortly with a really top D&I executive. We're putting together a council that will work hand in hand with our senior leadership to make sure that we're not only talking the talk, but we're also going to walk the walk and put these practices into place within our culture. And then externally, we've really been a part of some think tanks for our clients to understand that it's not about performative antics, right? We don't want to just make this slogan. We don't want to just put out this stance that say Black Lives Matter, and then we turn our cameras off when the cameras are gone. So how can we develop something that has some continuity in it, but also has some compassion ingrained in it, so that it's something that's long-term, because this is not something that's going to go away tomorrow. We're going to be Black, brown, Asian for the rest of our lives, right? So we should have some programming that follows us along our journey. So we've kind of handled it internally and externally for our clients and our staff.
So absolutely, a lot of those activities we're working on as well. I think I want to take a little bit of the client angle and give an example of how we're trying to do different with the same examples as before. So it is not uncommon for us to get potentially feedback, or it hasn't been in our industry, right? To get feedback that might be or may have racial tones to it. And recently, or actually right around the time that the Black Lives Matter movement began, we got feedback from a client that invoked a typical racial trope for Black women. And that's a tough one, right? Because at this point, Black Lives Matter was already in movement. So this is probably April, May-ish timeframe. And everyone's very sensitive about what's going on, and clients are obviously having a lot of revenue challenges and budget challenges and everything else. And you would think that at this moment in time, the last thing people would want to do is address this issue. But when it was raised to me by my team members, the first thing that I said we needed to do was address the issue. And I think that's one place where we as leaders can start doing different and changing our behavior for how we handle things that historically too many excuses would have been given. Oh, did they really mean that? Maybe that was for all of the pieces of work. Maybe it wasn't just that one character. This time around, we said, no, let's just assume that actually there was unconscious bias and racism in that tone of the feedback that we got, and let's go talk about it. So what we did was that we got the team who received the feedback from the client together with our HR team. And we walked through what happened, and we walked through our strategy for how we were going to talk to our client about addressing the actual feedback. We did that. We went back and talked to the client. We had to tread not carefully, but just differently. And so I'm not going to tell you that so far the process has been perfect, because it hasn't. Honestly, who's ever done this, right? So there is a first aspect to this of like, this is the first time we're trying to have a different kind of conversation around this type of stereotypical and racist feedback. So we had several conversations. We started discussing what that meant. And we then but most importantly, defended our work. And we were very firm about the fact that we were not going to change the people who we felt should be profiled within the campaign, because it was reflective of the ask from the client and reflective of the target audience. So they agreed. It was uncomfortable for all of our people, but we did it. And this is a story that is fully in development. Our relationship is actually in a really good place with the client. But this is the kind of thing we're gonna have to do more different against moving forward. Because that's where we're at, right? We all can say we believe something, but if we don't start acting and behaving differently and taking different steps, then nothing will change.
Thanks for sharing that. I think the dynamics of how it may shift those relationships and difficult conversations and sometimes decisions that might have to be taken out of that, even stepping back and looking at what we may include in our MSAs is important as we continue to move forward. But none of this is easy. It's difficult. It requires difficult conversations. And so my next question is for Paul in particular. Paul, why do you think it is so difficult, even amongst the layers and beyond them that we've discussed, for organizations to discuss race and privilege?
Well, I think the discussion is full of danger, right? I think there's always fear of doing something or saying something wrong. Did I sound condescending, or did I offend somebody with this? And I think when tensions are high and people are feeling, we're in an environment where the stress level is really high. And I think it's easy to jump on people when they say something that doesn't quite fit your perspective of how things should be communicated. So I think you have to try to build a level of trust. And I think when you don't have that trust, it becomes really, really difficult. I think after in May, after the George Floyd incident, we decided as a company, we're a smaller company, to divide up in groups of 4 to 6 people, and people that you normally didn't talk to because they were a creative and you were a tech guy, and sat on the other side of the office. So we put these groups together and we had discussions. And I just remember in one of our discussions, somebody, said the classic, don't all lives matter? And I think it could have been easy to kind of pounce on that person and just zoom in. And I think to the testament of the people involved, people did not jump on the person. And we actually took a step back and just kind of tried to create a discussion and create an analogy. And to Jelani's point, tell a story on a different end. And, we took it, from what I remember, it's like, a woman's daughter dies of cancer. You don't go into the woman after her daughter dies of cancer and say, hey, there's like 80 million people who die of cancer a month in the US. That's the perspective. And I think when you go at it that way, instead of really going at it angrily and taking out your frustration on that person and create, like, that reverberates throughout the discussions, right? Oh my gosh, I'm not going to say anything. So I think that's why it becomes difficult. And I think you have to be patient and you have to listen and try to build that trust.
Yeah, I think that's the second time so far in this conversation we've touched on the notion of trust or grace. And it is that balance, even through all the trauma of calling people out, but also calling people in, and it being, an invitation in some cases versus an indictment. But it all does start with conversation. The recent uprisings have opened conversations around systemic racism in the advertising industry. Earlier this year, in particular, over 600 advertising professionals signed a letter to U.S. agencies outlining actions they should take to achieve true equity for people of color in the workplace. I'd like for each of you to describe what equity looks like in our industry.
I can chime in to start on that one. I think a big challenge that we have in the industry, and I think this is something that COVID is doing to everything across the board, it's shining a magnifying glass on the structural issues that we have across the board, not just in terms of systemic racism, but also in terms of maybe some of the challenges or issues that we never fully addressed within the industry that make it more difficult for different groups to actually succeed. And so what I mean by that is for decades, we've been feeling the pressures of things like procurement and the improved utilization and maximizing your time, and in-office FaceTime has become like the thing, right? And the person who can do the 4 or 5 pitches in a row for months on end and gets on that flight, right? Those are the people who wind up getting a lot of the, what I'm going to call historical or mythical glory within our industry, right? And honestly, I feel like that should have been shifting a long time ago, because data and technology have already started the process of transforming of where the real value proposition lives for advertising and marketing. And that's been happening for decades. But our cultural norms of how to succeed within the industry haven't shifted to match that. And really what should be valued in our industry is the thinking power of the people. That's what should be valued. But today we value number of hours clocked, and we value FaceTime, and we value self-sacrifice for that crazy pitch for 100 hours a week and not seeing your family. And I don't actually think that is going to benefit any of us as we move forward in this industry, because it doesn't allow us to adapt and compete with ad tech and martech and consulting companies. They compete on knowledge, or they compete on technology advancement. You can't put enough hours in to compete against that. And secondly, I don't really think that's what our clients need anymore. And so we have to figure out how to shift that, because I think once you can shift that sort of paradigm for what we really value, which should be the thinking, the thought leadership that our people bring, regardless of the discipline, whether it's creativity or analytics or consumer experience or technology or data, it doesn't matter. It's the thinking that our people bring to the table that's actually valuable. Then all of a sudden you open the stage for all people, including Black, Brown, Asian people, to have a different seat, including moms, okay, dads, to have a different kind of seat at the table where their thinking is what's going to get value, not the number of hours they want to clocking.
I guess I can chime in here. For me, I mean, the question was, what should our industry look like? And I think in an ideal scenario, I would say if our agency was going out to hire a position, and all the relevant applicants based on skills and experience we reviewed, and that pool reflected the diversity of the nation, of our country. And I think ultimately that's what I see as the ideal, that, you know, there's no networking, there's no, you know, inside tracks. People are judged based on their abilities and their drive. And I think that's, in order to do that, we have to really go way upstream and fill the pipeline. I know there's, you know, deciding we're going to hire X people of color, you know, creating agendas around that is definitely important. But I think reaching out to the community and figuring out how do we fill the pipeline upstream, way upstream. I was talking with a Black colleague of mine, and, you know, to him growing up, graphic design was never in the realm of possibilities. And for me as an Asian, you know, it was either a doctor or a lawyer, you know, and if you didn't go there, then you had to figure something out. So I think going upstream is important. And I think as a company making a commitment at Goods and Services, we committed 5% of our profits to donate towards specific efforts that build diversity and fairness in the advertising industry. And what happened with that is, you know, the initial gut reaction was to go to a design school or a feeder school and set up a scholarship. But what we realized is people who would be getting those scholarships, they've already been filtered into some track, and we need to go further upstream and do more community reach out. You know, people who don't even consider marketing or graphic design as a potential career. I think it's important to reach and just build awareness and then reduce the barriers of entry.
Oh, I can totally relate to that, the doctor lawyer thing. It was doctor, lawyer, engineer in my family, but I think that there is definitely a pipeline issue from that standpoint. But in addition, I've been thinking a lot about retention, and, you know, if representation matters, which we all know matters, there's the hiring and pipeline, but there's also retention. And I think a lot of what's hard about retention is that so much of it is invisible, like a lot of the unconscious bias and microaggressions that people experience. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? So it's invisible, so you don't know it until it all compounds, and you want to leave because you don't feel like you belong. You know, one example that I bring up sometimes, and there are many, I'm sure, for all of you, is when I was at Cannes 3 years ago, and I definitely didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't let that get to me because, you know, I've been in this industry for a while, but I remember at least 75% of the gatherings that I was a part of, whether they were parties or, you know, just folks kind of gathering to introduce themselves, I would be in a group of a bunch of creative directors or creative leadership who all looked not like me. People would be introducing themselves to each other, and it's like they literally would skip over me in the circle, because I think they just assumed that I wasn't a creative director, or I wasn't, you know, part of that group. And at first I was like, oh, it's because I'm short. They just literally didn't see me. But it kept happening, and I started to remember and realize that, like, yeah, this is my reality when I'm not within my team or, you know, the folks I'm used to working with. When I'm out networking within the ad industry, you know, I am not the norm in terms of creative leadership. So I think that those experiences, as they add up over years, sometimes, you know, even as short as months, they can lead to, unfortunately, this emotional labor that does drive people out of the industry.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that too. Great points, talking about going upstream, right? Being a Black woman, I'm in sports and entertainment. So again, you don't see many of me sitting around talking about football, basketball, soccer, whatever the case may be, entertainment. So what I realize is that, to that point, Pavani said, it is about hiring, retention, and how are you cultivating that talent within your company, right? We have to move beyond, well, I hired X person, right? I hired this person, but you hired them, but what have you done to cultivate that talent, to bring them along that journey, to coach them, to mentor them, to show them what they need to do in order to get to the seat that you're in, or take your seat? Because as a leader, right, you want to be able to say that you left a mark and left it to where someone else can take over and continue the journey and make it their own. So I think it is incumbent upon us in advertising to not only hire people that don't look like us, but also spend the time to get them to where we need them to be, or maybe to where maybe they can show us something, right? This is a two-way kind of conversation. So what's always been done, the world is changing, right? So I think Solange said it earlier, the old way of thinking now is definitely going to make us stagnant. So I challenge us to make sure that we're not only hiring people of color, but we're also cultivating that talent and providing opportunities for them to sit at the table. Because at the end of the day, the more diverse the group is, the higher the profit is, let's be honest, right? Because it's a collective of the world. I think something around 35% or more profitable. And at the end of the day, we all work for businesses and we do want to make money. So let's challenge ourselves to not only hire talent or have interns, but to also cultivate that talent so that the room looks more reflective of the Americans that we're trying to serve and reach.
Those are excellent points. There's always so much focus on pipeline and not as much on creating the safe and inclusive environments within organizations for that same talent to thrive and grow in. Then those conversations to start that are important. I think a lot of the things that we've seen, though, also in talking about it, talking does become, I think to your point, also half of the battle. There's an immediate need for a call to action and driving towards systemic change. So if you could share, Solange and Pavani in particular, what are your organizations doing to demonstrate a long-term investment in diversity, equity, and inclusion? And if there are any learnings you could share, please do.
Yeah, sure, definitely. I'll share with you guys one of the things. So obviously, there is no network group that didn't come out with an action plan, right? So we have one, right? As do many people. What I am really proud of, though, is that the action plan is, and I'm going to read a couple of the steps here. There's 7 steps to our action plan. The first one is definitely the call for data and the revealing of the actual breakdowns of data, which we have committed to do and we will be doing every year. And that was part of the 600 and Rising. It was one of the number one things, is just to publicize the data, right? So that we at least know where we really stand. But I think I want to talk about number 2 and number 3, which is basically very specifically cultivate the careers of our Black talent, and then design a recruitment, interviewing, onboarding experience that champions Black talent. So I'm bringing that up because for years, as someone who's worked really hard to try to really push for DE&I initiatives, it has taken so long to finally get the community, the advertising industry, the marketing industry, to actually say the word Black. And I know I got to just say that because it's taken us this long, right? And now we have our number 2 and our number 3 goal is specific to our Black people. And I'm very proud of that because that's appropriate. That's the prioritization that we've been needing to do that we had refused to do. I think a lot of people are probably very familiar with this. The number 1 group that has actually benefited from the civil rights movement is actually white women. So I'm pointing this out in part because it's that kind of micro focus that we actually do have to have at this moment in time. Because when we don't, unfortunately, we go way too far on the lowest common denominator type of solves, and we don't allow ourselves to really address the real root causes of our problems and of the racism that is really very prevalent and just deeply ingrained in our society and our culture, and by default then our business practices. So that to me are 2 very specific steps. I am one of many people who have volunteered to now help actually create better programming. We've had it, but it did not make the change we wanted. And that's the other thing. We've acknowledged that everything we have been doing did not have the impact that we wanted to, so we're going to rework everything. So I and a lot of people, including actually Geraldine and many others, are sitting on task force and committees that are going to help reshape what these programs actually look like, aligned to these specific goals, to look at things differently and rebuild a systemic way to drive empowerment for our Black talent, and thereby eventually then start addressing every other subgroup that we also are going to need to address. And I think that's very important. It's the how, and I would recommend everybody keep an eye on this because I am too. The how behind the what they say is what matters.
Geraldine, in terms of action, the Second Story team specifically, even before everything that's been going on this year now, for years, we've always had a legacy of working with cultural institutions on the topic of racial injustice. And so work with the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, here in Atlanta, the Center for Civil and Human Rights, But specifically, about 5 years ago, we worked on a project called Traveling While Black, which was an experiential approach to getting people to really step inside the shoes of this experience, the Black American experience. And so we captured audio stories of Black Americans talking about discrimination that they faced while on the go. That experience was for an event, and it was really powerful. And it prompted us to look inward and think about how we could bring something like that to our own employees. And Publicis Sapient, which Second Story was a part of at the time, actually, funded and grew and scaled this new training that we created for our parent company. And I hesitate to call it a training because it's more of a immersive experience. And what we did was apply, as designers, we applied our skills to a problem that has been really hard for really every industry to solve, which is unconscious bias training. Corporate trainings, there's studies that show that many are often ineffective or sometimes even harmful. And so we wanted to take a designer's approach to it. And it's been successful and has been scaling across multiple, at least 19 offices now and across the globe. I think what has been heartening about that is that, we are realizing that each of us has a really unique role to play in this. Some of us can do kind of the basic things that we're all expected to do as human beings to be there for our colleagues, but some of us have gifts, superpowers, whether you're a designer or a technologist or a storyteller. And so finding your unique superpower and applying it to this problem in a different way, I think we'll be able to get to actions that matter much faster. And so that's what's been heartening to me in this moment. And I hope to see more folks in, this year, especially with the attention that this is getting, more folks doing that.
Thanks to both of you. I think, Solange, I think definitely I can attest to the long-term systemic change and the commitments that you mentioned, and Pavani as well, to the amazing work that Second Story did as it facilitated 19 of those sessions over the past year, just seeing the dynamics of how it can actually change the workplace and the way that colleagues interact with each other. The things that we do internally and externally are extremely important. And Solange, I'd want to talk to you a little bit about Advertising for Change, which is a coalition of Atlanta advertising and marketing agencies committed to diversity and inclusion. So you're a part of the organization's leadership team. Can you talk a little bit about the partnership and some of the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. So it's the brainchild of Spence Kramer. I always have to say that because I think his impassioned letter back in 2016, the last time we did this, when a lot of those deaths were really starting to make national news, he sent us all a letter. And the letter said, you know what, we're in advertising and we control the story. And it's amazing that with all of that, we haven't even talked about or figured out how we can, number one, really influence our own storyline as an industry, because if we don't reflect, right, what the world really looks like in this country, then what are we doing here? And secondly, we could help drive that mission in a different kind of way. Now, I'm an advocate, like I'm a believer, I'm a native New Yorker, so I don't want anyone in New York to take this the wrong way. But change can be hard when you're used to things a certain way on Madison Avenue. I think Atlanta is where the new wave of advertising and marketing is going to come from, because we just see the world a slightly different way. And so what we decided to do is break another norm in the industry. And instead of actually continuing to compete against each other as agencies, we said this is too big of a mission to drive diversity and inclusion for us to compete against each other. Let's do it together. So we came together as four agencies in the Atlanta marketplace, and our goal was very simple. We want to be the most diverse advertising and marketing city or geography out of the US, and we want to be the most diverse industry in Atlanta business community. Those were the two things that we set for ourselves when we started off on this journey 4 years ago. The way that we do all of our work today, actually, we have 3 new members who have joined us. Originally, it was Moxie, 22 Squared, J. Walter Thompson, and Fitzco. And now we also have Edelman and Zenith and Chemistry. who have joined us as well. So we're up to 7 agencies who are working together in the Atlanta community to really drive more engagement. We do it in very specific ways. Number one, definitely the development of the talent pipeline, but we don't recreate programs. We support programs that work. So we work with MAPE, which is the Multicultural Advertising Internship Program. And we sponsor a MAPE cohort here in Atlanta every year. COVID as an exception this year, typically that also ends in a competition where one of us offers a job and the candidate, the most valuable intern, gets to pick what agency. And then from there, we also do extra programming and networking so that they can start building their social network, which is, we understand, is so critical to actually succeeding in this industry. The other way that we look at this is that we're doing a lot more live events now, where we're trying to really bring more topics that are important for diversity and inclusion to the industry overall. So just recently, a couple of weeks ago, we hosted a live event. We're going to be doing more of those. Like everybody else, our live events have had to switch from in-person to virtual. So we're working through how to get the word out on things like that. And last but not least, as Paul noted, we also saw that if you didn't already pick to go to an advertising or marketing major, it gets really hard to get into our industry. And there's so many kids who don't even know. I myself, Pavani, engineering was also part of my list. I only had 3 options, right? And I was told I had the gift of gab, so it almost felt like I could only be a lawyer. I chose advertising instead. But a lot of kids just don't know. They just don't know. So one of the things we're looking to expand to is high school, and starting to really open up the eyes so that these kids know that there's real viable opportunities within this industry. And what I think is so amazing about what we do is that it could be any discipline. We have everything represented in advertising and marketing, from data to creative to user experience to technology to strategy and planning. You could be anything and still be in our space. And that's a huge part of what we try to really push the agenda for advertising for change. And like I said, we're doing it together. And I think that's so key. And it's so right for what the next wave of what our community, our industry really needs to look like.
Thanks for that, Solange. It's such amazing work, and thank you for everything that you're doing. You know, as you sort of step back and think about where we are in the scope we're talking about pipeline, that stepping back and having the conversation even with high school students, if you go to even junior high schools and ask children, you know, what do you love to do? Inevitably, someone says, I love math, I love art, I love to tell stories. And there is a career for each one of them in advertising. And truthfully, you can't aspire to be what you're unaware exists. And I think that's the first step to, you know, even uncovering some of the bias that exists from an educational level and creating that awareness. So Pavani and Paul, as we start to talk about bias, conscious and unconscious, how do you feel we can best start to remove unconscious and conscious bias from how we design products and digital experiences?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Everything has a bias, right? There's good bias, there's bad bias. They're really context and reference points. And it's really understanding what is good and what is bad and what you want to stand for. And I think for us, the phrase that really hits my head is to be bullheaded by design. And to me, that means not just the fact that you design very bold directions. You make it an agenda when you take on a design project to turn something upside down or approach something in a totally different way as one of the conceptual directions that you pitch. And I think, for example, I think this is really interesting. We had a client that was looking to develop an underwear brand and wanted to tag on to some really key cultural phenomenon around body positivity and gender fluidity. And I think, you know, the normal thing is to talk about the sizing, you know, do the airy thing and, you know, which is all great stuff. But we thought, why don't we just get rid of genders and design by style? So you go into this website, I mean, any website you go into, right? It's men's, women's, and you go in and you're automatically there. And we decided, why don't we design the underwear based on the style that somebody wants to wear and then take it down from there. So you design from the style for it, and then you you adjusted for whatever the gender, whatever the whatever the secondary features are, you're focused on the style, and style becomes forward. And I thought, it was interesting because it poses a lot of different problems, right? When you're trying to shop or when you're trying to target people. But I think what it did was it forced us to think about the product design aspect. And this is physical product that translated into digital product because of the user interface of the design and the website and how we sold. So I think it's really being bullheaded by design, just deciding that you're going to, take a chance and do that. What if we did, doing more of the what if we's. And that's pretty much for me kind of what I wanted to say. So
I love that example. The obvious answer to your question, Geraldine, is more diverse teams. And I feel like that's been something that we've in more recent years all as an industry have been realizing and trying to do. But I wonder, honestly, if, I think that should absolutely happen, and I believe that, but I wonder if that's gonna help enough. I think part of it is also what Paul just mentioned, because I think we all grew up as a generation of designers, despite the color of our skin, being indoctrinated by, I guess, a very Eurocentric, almost white design values, right? And we can't help it. So that's kind of what we grew up in, whether you grew up as a designer or you learned the trade once you entered the field. So I think it's going to take some very proactive, intentional disruption, both for design educators as well as design leadership within agencies, because again, a lot of folks just learn this stuff on the job, to proactively challenge the status quo. And I again, love Paul's example, because I think if we did that consistently at the leadership level, as well as when you're in design school, just learning things very differently. I didn't actually realize this myself, honestly, until I had traveled back to India more recently, a few years ago. And I'd grown up going to India every couple of years. So I was always seeing images, and it's a very different world. If you've traveled internationally, you start to realize that design elsewhere doesn't always look like the design, good design, doesn't look like what we're all being feeded or fed by the media. And so I think just challenging the norm, challenging what we all consider to be good design on a daily basis is something that would be a good practice for all of us.
Thanks. Those were both great responses. As we continue in this conversation, some I think some additional thought around overall recruitment. We talked about pipeline a little bit, and about retention. Do you think the industry has more of a recruitment issue, a retention issue, or both, and why? Jelanii, I'd like to pose that question to you to start.
I'm going to say it's both. I think it's a recruitment issue because so many times you hear, and throughout my career, hear people saying, "Well, I just don't know where to go," and it baffles me because I'm surprised. What do you mean you don't know where to go to get diverse talent, right? And being in Atlanta, we are in the hub, right, of HBCUs. And I'm a little biased, my family, Norfolk State, but I'm in Atlanta. So we have to start, like we said, with the pipeline of, and HBCUs are, let me just say, are not a fad, right? So let's not reach out to them just because there's a lot of chatter around them right now, right? They produce the most doctors, the most people in STEM. So there is a lot of rich talent there. Nothing against PWIs as well, but really be intentional about reaching out to HBCUs and other, we'll say, lower income high schools that have great talent that need to be tapped into. So I think building that pipeline and going outside of your norm, that goes back to your network, right? You can't network with people if you don't know where they are. So that goes back to, it's really cyclical, right? You can't reach out to people if you don't know where people are. You don't know where people are because everybody looks like you. So again, it's all about broadening your base and broadening your network. And then again, going back to that retention, I think Pavani said it earlier, it's one thing to bring people in the door, but how are we keeping them? And one thing we don't like to talk about, and it's the elephant in the room, is pay. right? It's doing a comp analysis. It's understanding that you're not only paying me for the time I spend, you're paying me for the value that I bring. And it doesn't maybe take me 10 hours to do something. It could take me 2 hours and it could be exceptional. And that's okay, right? It's changing that norm. So I think again, it's a cyclical thing. So I think it's on us to not only reach out, but also make sure we're pulling up once we bring them into the organization.
So I like to chime in on the retention side, because I do think it's both as well. But on the retention side, we have to talk about the fact that the advertising culture is not friendly to all people. That'd be the other elephant in the room. It is a very difficult thing to walk in every single day into an industry that you want to be an active participant in and not feel welcomed and or feel awkward because you didn't catch that joke or because you actually didn't think it was funny. That's tough. And so we haven't necessarily created a culture where all people not just feel welcome, but can bring their whole selves to work. It's a hang up of mine. I'm just gonna give you an example of mine, but you won't ever see a picture of my kids. I have 3. You won't see them in my office. It's for a long time, I think it was subconscious. Now I'm conscious of it, but there's a reason why. You know, I grew up watching Working Girl. You weren't supposed to have kids. So if you wanted to be like a woman professional, right? So I plan to, post-COVID, litter my office with pictures of my children because I realized that it wasn't setting a good example for my own parents, women and men, that's critical and important, that it's okay for you to be thinking about family while you are at work. But that is one small example of all the subconscious and sort of micro situations and aggressions that you feel every day when you're a person of color, especially a Black person or a brown person, walking into an environment that you didn't grow up in, right? You don't understand it. You don't see the world that way. So retention to me is very concerning because here's the thing. Google and Facebook and every other ad tech and Salesforce and every other MarTech company and then the consulting agencies, technically every last one of those companies that I just mentioned have, if not tenfold more market capitalization than the entire advertising industry combined, okay? You know what that means? That means they can pay. And they can do this faster and differently than we can as an industry. So I think we fail to understand other people might get this right faster than we do because they just have more money to throw at it than we do. And I don't know if we really understand what that competition is. It's part of the reason why I think coming together as an industry is so fundamentally critical for us, because that's the only way we're going to compete. Our competition is not each other. Our competition is all the other industries that I just mentioned. So figuring out how we do retention differently, it is fundamental, because I really do believe that's where our next big threat is going to come as an industry. They're going to get it right faster because they just have more money. We need to get it right faster because we finally recognize the value of our people.
Agreed. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I definitely want to get to some of the Q&A that's built up from the audience. But before we do, I'd like to ask each of you, what is the single most important thing our attendees can do to advocate and show up for minorities in the workplace?
I can go. I was just waiting for someone else to go off mute, but I'll go. Paul actually said this earlier. I think it's listening to start. And I think part of that is because we all assume we know enough before we want to take action. And one example of this is just the fact that as all of this is happening, as I'm a woman of color, and I could sit back and say, this is something that I'm experiencing. But the truth is that as an Indian American, I have a set of privileges. While I have experienced bias tenfold, in the industry and growing up, I also carry a set of privileges. This is something I've come to realize over the last few years. And I think it's going to take each of us to kind of not think of that word privilege as something icky, but also as a superpower that you can harness. And so identifying those superpowers and then, putting those to use. And so as an Indian American for myself, it has been having conversations with other Indian Americans to join the movement and to be true allies. Many don't understand that there is a difference. I mean, often we are lumped as minorities into a big group. And I think there's something beautiful about that because we can all uplift each other and support each other. But there is harm in the fact that people don't understand the nuances of the discriminations that people of different subgroups face. And if you don't understand that, you can't solve for it. So, just telling, again, my Indian American peers that like, hey, your ancestors, most likely your just parents, arrived here by choice. They weren't forced here. And that's just one difference. And there are many that have generational impacts that most people just don't understand. So I think it's understanding those nuances by listening and having these conversations and having those tough dialogues so that you can continue to be curious and then thereafter act.
I would say, you want to go first?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Depending on your role, I have two one things. If you are in the industry, you're working, you're an employee, right? You might be middle management, up to middle management, okay? Your job is to use your voice and your power to hold the leadership accountable, okay? You don't have a choice. You have to do it. If we don't maintain the pressure, the change will not happen. And it's exhausting. I understand what I'm asking, okay? But you have to, because there's no change without a concerted chorus of objection to ensure that we in the leadership spaces stay accountable. If you are in leadership, you are required to do different. Again, I understand what I'm asking. I understand what I'm saying. It's more work. None of us are getting extra resources. None of us are getting extra anything. It is COVID, right? We are all in an economic recession right now, but we cannot do the same, right? Change will not come from doing what we did yesterday. Change will only come from doing different from yesterday. So to me, those would be the two one things, right? Hold us accountable. If you're an employee in the industry, just keep pushing and keep using your voice. And if you're a leader, do something about it. You have to take action, and it's a requirement for everyone now.
Okay, I'll go. And that's hard too, right? One thing. So I would say the one thing would be to, and this is actually maybe an actual a tactic, is to really conduct an internal analysis. And by that, I mean, take inventory of who's sitting at the table when decisions are made, who's sitting at the table when it's an RFP, who's sitting at the table when it's a new business meeting. And if you notice it's the same people all the time, start there, right? That's something very simple that you can do. If you notice that it is the same people having the same conversations, then that is a good place to start, because it is always one thing to say, well, I didn't know, Jelanii, that you were capable of doing X, Y, and Z. And I would say you never asked. So conduct an internal audit, I would say, is the first thing to do, because if you start there, I think you'll start to see some change, and it's something that you can start tomorrow.
So I'm just going to say that everything the other panelists said, I agree with wholeheartedly. I think going back to an old business rule, I think attaching a metric and a deliverable to initiatives that you're doing. I think Solange talked about a how. I think if you attach a metric and a deliverable, you can gauge how well you're doing, and it forces you to be honest, forces you to stay on track, because, hey, we decided for example, we decided we're going to donate 5% of our profits to diversity and inclusion. What did we do? We have an agenda that we need to fill. If we don't do that in the timeline we designated, then we failed. And so I think it really is about just accountability. I think you can tackle this issue is so systemic that you can tackle it on the inclusion, the upstream pipeline. You know, there's so many ways and so many ways to go at it. So I think rather than do that, whatever way you decide that works best for you and your company, to attach it to a metric and a deliverable that you can be graded against. And I think if you do that, then at least you can see progress, or you can measure your progress. And I think it's critical to be able to do that.
Thanks to each of you. You know, I want to allow some time for the audience Q&A, and there are some amazing questions here as well. Solange, you touched on this a bit earlier in terms of dealing with incidents around racist comments or elements from clients. The question is, do agencies feel empowered to tell clients with racist tendencies that they no longer will tolerate these types of views, and they have to be on board with the agency's mission and goals of equality and inclusion? So how should agencies really deal with some of these issues? And I know Solange touched on some of this before, but if anyone has anything else to add, I'd love to hear from you as well. Paul, has this come up in your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to make it worth the client's while to think about it differently. You know, I think Solange was touching on it earlier, you know, pointing out a very difficult issue around a racist response or whatever. I think part of design and solving problems is figuring out a way that what you want them to feel, or what they're feeling that it seems to be misguided, you've designed a solution that they can't deny works for them. And I think that's the only way it's going to really impact on the client side. You know, at the end of the day, they're going to want their deliverables, right? They're going to want results. And if you can deliver results and figure out a way where that melds with, you know, a certain initiative around D&I, I think that's critical. I think it's just being clever, you know, being really thinking and being really creative and design oriented around things that make it worthwhile. I think, you know, when 4 years ago when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, right? He was crazy. Now he takes a knee. I mean, if he took a knee now, you know, it's not even, it's totally a different time. So I think it's like opening up the people's minds at the time and telling the story right makes a dynamic worth their while. And then you get companies like Nike, you know, jumping on that ad and turning it into something. But, you know, I hate to turn something that's very important into something about money. But at the end of the day, you know, this question was about how do agencies deal with clients, and that really revolves around, you know, what do you deliver to the service as a service to the client. So
I think the elephant in the room with this question is what happens if you compromise your revenue, right? Because that's the concern, right? Do you walk away from it? Like, if they don't want to change, or if the conversation goes bad, do they get mad at you and fire you? And or do they say, well, this is just who we are, you either accept it or, you know, you can go. And I think that's the conversation we need to have more of, and just be understanding that we need to be willing to take risks to drive change. It was clear to me when I agreed that we were going to go and have these conversations that it could compromise our relationship and result in revenue reduction. I was very clear on that. And I was very clear with the team that I was making the call, and that it would be, you know, my throat to choke. That's my job, by the way, as a leader. That's what I'm supposed to do. So I was fine with it. I was comfortable with it. And because I value this so much, I was willing to take that risk. We got to do more of that. That's just basically what it is. If we really believe in something, then we have to be willing to put our money where our mouths are. But it's not, again, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. I have the privilege of taking that risk because I felt some level of comfort that I would get backing from my management. Not complete backing, by the way, just enough that I felt that we were going to take the chance. It's hard. It's hard. But leadership is hard. So.
Yeah. In sort of continuing the theme around clients, there's another question here that gets into a little bit more specifics, and it's for the panel. But what are your thoughts in regards to working with clients, though, whose not just their behavior, but whose products and or services may benefit from systemic racism and exploiting the inequities within communities of color? With 2020 as a backdrop, do you think there's an opportunity or even a responsibility to be more selective in what brands we may market and help to advertise?
I'm going to say absolutely. And I would say one of the great things about You Are Here is that all the clients that we have, I think we're really proud of, right? We're kind of a small to mid agency here in Atlanta, but one thing we do is that all of our clients, I think, have great intention about the products that they have and the services that they put out. I think the other thing that is really beneficial is that this word has been used a lot is trust. And I think our clients trust us to tell a story on their behalf that doesn't marginalize or stereotype a certain community and demographic. And I'm going to use, for an example, Black Lives Matter, right? Because at one point in time, there was a statement made that, you know, it's really in right now. And I raised my hand because I was like, being Black is, you know, I'm always in. Like, that's not going to, you know, go away, because Black Lives Matter is not, yes, it's a movement, but it's really a statement of Black Lives Matter, right? So it's being able to have that trust and that conversation to move past kind of the stereotypical things. And that's what we're talking about. Our job as advertisers to dig deeper into the insights to help our clients position their products in a way that's beneficial, that does not stereotype. So from our standpoint, we don't run into that. And I think I'm glad that we are selective, and the clients that we do have trust us to tell their story on their behalf, so that we don't do harm in such a sensitive climate right now, when they're trusting us to take baby steps to make sure we're doing it slow and correct instead of fast and wrong.
Thanks for that. The next question, Paul, is for you directly. You mentioned metrics and deliverables and attaching that to the measuring of progress. Can you share some of the specific metrics and deliverables your company outlined for the commitment of the 5% around diversity and fairness in the industry?
I think it's setting deadlines for us to determine the initiatives and when we want to deliver on them. So for example, we wanted to make sure that within a 3-month time frame, we had designated where we were going to support those, direct those monies to. And I think we're still at the stage of trying to figure this out. We had thought initially that it was going to be, you know, around scholarships, and we really think that we need to go upstream, and we're figuring out strategy and reaching out. In fact, I'm probably going to be contacting Solange about this advertising for change thing, because that might be an interesting, you know, the high school outreach, those type of programs. We had a plan in place, but that didn't work out. So I think we're adjusting. So I think it's deadlines and specific deadlines to hit on what we're trying to achieve. So I don't know if that answers the question directly, but I think it's just setting deadlines and what you're going to do.
Thanks. There's a question specific for some advice from an employee who's tried to address D&I initiatives, but there's been no one to go to. So the question really is, when HR has shown no interest in proactively addressing the issues or showing empathy or understanding, where do you go to and whom do you go to? And understanding each organizational structure is might vary. If you have any advice about what next steps might be for that person. Pavani, can we start with you?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, that's hard. It's unfortunate that HR, you'd think that HR would help. For me, it's been identifying people within leadership who might have more power or more influence than me, and it's often a white man. And so finding an advocate and finding someone who can have a louder voice than myself to help push things through. It sounds sad, but it's the reality, and that's what has worked for me in the past. And I'm hopeful that this individual can identify somebody like that within the organization that they can, you know, get to advocate on their behalf.
Yeah, Pavani, I love your suggestion about a white man. I would say to you, I can count all the champions in my life who helped me really move forward in my career, and they're all white men. That's not good, by the way, necessarily, because that, number one, exemplifies the power structure problem that we have. And number two, it also showcases that it's hard for people of color and women to actually support other people of color and women. So the system works against us in multiple ways. The one thing I want to say about the HR piece is I'm not making excuses for our talent HR recruiting teams here, but I do want to point out that a lot of times HR and recruiting have a role to play, and their role is to really support and really implement for the sake of the corporation. And that's why I'm actually a strong advocate of DE&I roles being separate and apart from HR. Because there's a role that needs to be had for talent management, and a lot of it is more what I'm going to call protocols, procedural, fair and equitable treatment. There's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of work there already, and a really relentless focus on DE&I really should be a separate entity. And honestly, that DE&I entity should have a straight line into the highest level C-level person you can get, ideally the CEO, which is how we're structured in our organization, where we do have a split. We have two separate teams. And that also helps then organizationally to give people a second place to go have a voice around these things. So if there is no DE&I person, I agree with Pavani, find a champion that you can go speak to who's higher ranking than you and who can help share the agenda and share the issue out, who may get more notice and more attention, and then go from there.
And Solange, your mention of the notion of mentorship or making connections, and a lot of those who have been influential, having been white men, is leading me to sort of jump to this next question. And that is, I heard great comments around retention and how big of a part that networks play in this industry. Are any of you mentors to Black and Brown talent in the ad world? And if so, what advice would you give to others aspiring to be helpful to Black and Brown talent by mentoring? Jelanii, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll start with that one. I am. Getting a message says, you're my mentor, Jelanii. I am. I feel that it's a responsibility. Again, I don't see many of me. I am a Black woman in sports and entertainment, and I don't see many of me at this level, right? So I think part of it is I have a responsibility to, I don't want to say reach down, because that's not right, to reach out to others who are starting their journey and helping them understand. I like to say I'm redefining what leadership looks like, right? Because I'm not going to have, be a white man, have gray hair. I don't have a green egg. I play ball. I listen to, Essence. I love Beyonce, right? So I'm helping them show up as their full selves, but here's how you play the game. Like, here are the things that you need to know, because sometimes some people's first interaction with a Black woman is me. And so I have a responsibility to set the tone and then bring others along the journey, because I'm in the mindset of, scoot over, like, we about to come to the table, we're gonna take up space, and it's gonna be fun, and it's gonna be okay, right? So reaching out, speaking during NCAA about young Black girls who don't know that this is an opportunity, I think it's important for us, because there's not enough room for competition. I think we need to get rid of that, right? We're better as a community, we're better as a collective, so I do make sure that, I'm able to reach back out to, whether it's mentors, whether it's just other colleagues, and show them what I know, because I don't want it to just be me. I want the landscape to change. So yeah, I think it's definitely important to make sure that you're mentoring.
Thanks. I'll actually stay with you for a moment, because there's another question that was specific to you around mentorship and network. You shared broadening your base and network. What are your thoughts, not just on mentors and sponsors, but do you feel that having a focus on that helps to broaden our community and tribe? If there's anything else you wanted to expand on with that?
Yeah, and I think, like I said, even at my job, I'm a little outspoken. I do show up as myself. My president knows, he's like, Jelanii, I know I'm gonna call you and you're gonna tell me, what it is. And yes, but we have a great relationship. So I always operate in a yes and. yes, I want to get to know who you are, and I need you to know who I am and what I bring to the table. Because again, sometimes your first interaction is going to be with me, and I want to break the stereotype or whatever you have in your mind about a Black woman, whether she's angry, whether she's aggressive, all these things that already preset before I even open my mouth are already there. So I'm going to come with a smile. I'm going to come with a joke. And then that next Black woman that comes behind is going to get the benefit of the doubt because we've changed that narrative. So I think it's important. I do try to network. I do want to make sure that, again, that people know that we're not angry Black women. At the end of the day, that is not who we are. And having an opinion is okay, as long as you're open and respectful about how you do that. So I do make sure that, networking is important, and that you pass that knowledge on to other Black women who are coming up, whether it's in this field or any other field.
Agreed. There's a question here, sort of a call for advice that I would love for us to be able to address, because it starts to lean into sort of elevation and an allyship. So I'm a content strategist for a small agency that likes to highlight the good work other creatives are doing. I've been recently trying to amplify work from people of color. I was wondering if there are some suggestions on how to best go about that. I don't want to make people feel like I'm using their work for tokenism.
There's a guy, his name is Steven, I'm gonna get his name wrong, Wolf Pereri, or I can send it to everyone. But he founded this company called Encantos, which is all about creating educational systems in Spanish for little kids. And he started a series where he's highlighting all of his, as an ally, okay? He's highlighting all the Black talent because he got frustrated. And he's doing this on LinkedIn. And every other day, he posts a new Black person who is a Black talent, and he highlights them and showcases them. And he's literally using his platform to go and advocate for Black talent, because he was so damn frustrated that people kept saying, well, we don't have any Black talent. He's like, yeah, you do. And so I'd go look for people like him. That's my advice. Go find him, and I'll look him up and put him in the chat so that you guys can see the series that he did. And I look for other people who are doing that. Now, he is Latino, but like myself, he is white presenting Latino, and he's male. So there is an element of privilege that we have that we can still use to amplify those who are excellent talent and yet are not getting a shot or a chance because they're not even being heard, because it's not coming from someone that people will listen to. So I'll post him in the chat so that you can look him up. And then see how he does it, because he does it in a brilliant way. He's getting so much attention for so many talented people. It's actually very commendable what he's doing.
Thanks for that, Solange. So the next question is tied to this in a way, in that for this individual raising their hand and wanting to do this is a bit disruptive. It's taking a chance as well. So as a leader, is there a time where you ever recognize your team's attempt at disruption, and how did you reward that?
I'll say not necessarily recognizing my team's disruption, but I'll say our senior leadership recognized our disruption, and now we're having conversations. Sometimes disruptive marketing, shaking people up. So I'll reverse it and say, like I said, I'm kind of, although I'm a vice president, right, kind of mid-level management. So I'll say our team disrupted things, didn't ask for permission, came to the table and kind of was like, oh, wait a minute. And it kind of was okay, right? It was a little apprehensive, but I think one thing is we knew that our hearts were in the right place. And at the end of the day, we were thinking about the company. And I think our leaders knew that as well. So we shook things up a little bit, and now we're pushing a conversation along. So I think disruption can be good if your heart's in the right place and you're doing it with some integrity and thinking about the long-term benefits that it's going to bring to the company. I say shake it up, go for it, disrupt all day.
I think that's great advice. There are several questions here that still are themed around accountability, which I know we've covered quite a bit, but there are a couple just from a different angle that I'd like to pose. So I'll do it as a two-part question. So the first part is, how can I, as a junior employee, continually challenge my leaders to take action? So what actions would you give to a junior? And Jelanii, you touched on this a little bit just now, but as a senior leader, there's still a hierarchy and leaders above you. What are you doing even at your level to garner the attention of the most senior leaders in the organization? But Solange, I'm going to start with you for that one, please.
Sure thing. So, we still have to represent for folks and push the message up the chain, right? And bring attention to matters. So a lot of times I will get recommendations from our team members about things we should do, and then I'll package it up and push it as an idea to senior management. So an example of that would be Juneteenth. So it was very important that we start thinking about recognizing that as a holiday, because it recognizes a more realistic version of history in terms of what really constitutes independence in this country, and the fact that most Black people were not actually freed from slavery until almost 2 years later from the date that it was actually declared. And Juneteenth has been celebrated for a very long time, but it was not, it's not recognized as a federal holiday, but it is recognized in 38 states at the local level. I mean, that's just the irony, it's insane. So someone texted me and said, we should do something about this. I said, all right. And then I kicked it up, right? And I said, we should do something about it. Now, unfortunately, it was too close to the date for us to have a concerted effort for the whole group, Publicis group. We are 24,000 people across the United States. But we were able to get to enough people where certain subsegments were able to at least recommend the day and allow people to take that day and encourage people to take that day off. And when that happened, as soon as we got the approval, the first thing I did was redirect it back to the person who actually submitted the proposal. It wasn't me. I immediately gave all the credit to the person who came up with the idea, because it wasn't me. But my job was to advocate the idea. So that's one way that we can continue to push up the line to get people. And I help to build a whole case for it, because it's not easy. You can just say Juneteenth, right? But it's not simple. You have to put a case together for it and explain to people why it's going to be so important to do. So I try to help and support in that way around different things. The next big one that I'm sure everybody's talking about right now is Election Day, and trying to figure out how to really support our people to vote. Regardless of what party they choose to vote. I'm like, just have your voice heard. And we're trying to figure out how we can support on that front. And again, I can't come to these ideas. I'm not original in no way, shape, or form, but our people are. And my job is to facilitate good ideas getting a stage. So that's one way to do it.
Thanks for sharing that, Solange.
I was just going to say, I think as a leader, like Solange said, it's trying to advocate and push things through. If you're a junior employee and you, let's say, don't have someone like Solange that is doing that for you, this, again, is going to sound a little unfortunate, but leaders, especially senior leadership, are very busy people. So often they're not necessarily trying to ignore actions. It might not be top of mind because they have a lot going on for them. And so if you're a more junior person, it might mean that you have to maybe package things up or do that hard work like Solange said she did before she pushed it up. So it's kind of just doing everything you can to make it as easy as possible for the person above you or leadership to say yes or no. Like just take action rather than having to do more work to then figure it out. And again, the burden will fall on people of color. So that is unfortunate. But that's kind of the way that I've seen things move and happen in the current climate.
Yeah, I think it's important to be able to package and make your argument and your case in a very impactful way. And I think part of that might be, as a junior person, I'm looking back at myself when I first entered the fashion industry. I knew nobody. But what I did was I had a bunch of friends that I would meet through work industry events. So I created a network of colleagues throughout the industry. And so when I needed advice, I would go to them and try to get feedback on how to position things. So it's definitely good to find an advocate upstream, But if you can create a network like Jelanii was talking about, expanding your network, if you can expand your network, and we have great tools like LinkedIn and otherwise, but be able to reach out to people in your similar position at different companies where they may have a roadmap for you to take. So I think expanding your network horizontally is also very helpful.
I totally agree. Only add, don't ask for permission. I know leaders, I would say senior leaders, love initiative. You don't have to ask for permission if you're doing something that's going to impact change in a positive way. And I'll say this too, it is COVID. Nobody's really going anywhere. Everybody's in front of their computers. So what Paul said, reach out, like LinkedIn, DM, email. We're all kind of sitting at home. So this is a great time to expand your network.
I mean,
Oh, Paul, you're on mute.
I went to mute instead of unmute. I'm not getting paid by these guys, so this is completely full disclosure. But through my network, I got invited to this thing called Lunchtime. And basically what it does is it sets you up with 2 or 3 meetings a week, or whatever number of meetings you want to have per week. It automatically sets up a 30-minute Zoom with somebody either you've wanted to reach out of similar people in the industry or outside the industry. You set the parameters, and what they do is they come to you with a list of folks, and you decide, yes, I want to talk with these people. So I tried it on a lark, and I've met 2 people. I just moved to Atlanta. So I've met 2 people in Atlanta in the industry, and it's been enlightening. I found out that I do not live in Midtown. Yeah, I don't live in Midtown. I was like, I think I live in Midtown, but apparently I was wrong. So, but there are a lot of those type of sites, especially now with the environment we're in, that are allowing people to connect.
Thanks for that. So it is exactly 8 o'clock, and while we do have a few more questions, we are unfortunately out of time. I do want to thank each of the panelists for such a dynamic and informative conversation. It's reflected in both the chat and the Q&A, the appreciation for all of the reflections that each of you shared. I want to thank the audience for joining as well. And just in terms of a few of the key takeaways, just keep pushing forward through all of this. Managing through inclusion and crisis is not easy, but the difficulty and bravery in having the conversations is important. And as Jelanii said, disrupt all day. So I'll pass it off to Jenna now to close.
Thank you. I want to give a huge thank you to our moderator and our panelists for your time this evening. Thank you so much for sharing such valuable insights and for shining a light on the important issues that have been addressed here tonight and how we can help advocate for real change. For any remaining questions, we will be providing answers to these from our panelists in our follow-up, which will include the full video recording from tonight's event. So thank you to all of our members and all of our attendees for joining us this evening. Please continue to let us know how we can help support you during this time. Make sure to check out our site and our social channels to find out more about other virtual events to come. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great evening.